Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of the Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch is a 1957 memoir written by Henry Miller. Miller is somewhat of an icon of the American literature and has a cult-like following, probably helped by many of his books being banned in the US until the 1960s. Through his rebellious writings, he inspired beat literature and many later counter-social movements, even though he himself was pretty uninterested and inactive in any type of social protest. I think what mattered to him the most was the individual and being left alone to live one's life. What I like about Henry Miller is his sincerity, the raw honesty, even when he squeezes fiction into his autobiographies. I find him similar to Bukowski, who was critical of Miller's philosophizing and preaching, but the criticism seems somewhat superficial. What made them different is that Bukowski was an introvert and an observer, wrote what he saw, and left it to the reader to draw his own conclusions, where Miller preferred to make clear what he was writing about. But I think both of them enjoy just writing for its own pleasure, without much ambition for recognition and material rewards. What is Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch about? It is an autobiographical account of Henry Miller's life in Big Sur, where he led an outcast-like existence, in many ways similar to Walden of Henry David Thoreau. There is a world here as full and rich, as compelling and instructive as Thoreau found at Walden. It is Henry Miller on Henry Miller and life in general, but unlike his more famous autobiographical novels, cleaned up and accessible to a broad audience, also without fictionalizing his adventures, just observing and remembering. If it be knowledge or wisdom one is seeking, then one had better go direct to the source. And the source is not the scholar or philosopher, not the master, saint, or teacher, but life itself, direct experience of life. The same is true for art. Here, too, we can dispense with the masters. The underlying question in the book seems to be what is success or successful life, and Miller offers some advice on how to live it. A bit of the plot. The plot is Henry Miller's life in Big Sur. It covers the first half, 10 years or so of his life there. The book starts with an introduction about what he did before arriving in Big Sur and what led him to go there. He talks about his intention of going to Spain but ending in Paris, and later moved to Greece, motivated by the German invasion of France, and from Greece, where he was planning on spending the rest of his life, he returned to America thanks to the pesky Germans again. Miller descended from German immigrants, but in his writings he wasn't very flattering to his ancestors. Maybe the pacifist Miller didn't agree with their 20th century exploits. Miller describes Big Sur itself, its geology and fauna and flora, and what attracted him to it. And later he describes the people of Big Sur, mostly his neighbors, artists and jocks of all trade, and also his family, the wife and daughter and son who were born there. And the last part focuses on his eccentric acquaintance from Paris, Conrad Morgan, who he brought to Big Sur to live with him, and the unpleasant disaster the whole affair turned into. What are my thoughts about Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch? If you are a Henry Miller lover, I mean the man and not necessarily all his writings, then this book is for you. If you are interested in the individual, there is a lot of information and personal details presented as rambling and philosophizing, many that only fans of Henry Miller would be interested in. The title refers to the 15th century painting The Garden of Early Delights by the Dutch artist Hieronymus Bosch, and it depicts an earthly but fictitious paradise where all people live in harmony and run around naked, feasting on oversized oranges and other fruit. It is Miller's way of showing how much he appreciated Big Sur. I have seen the original painting in the Prado Museum in Madrid, and it is quite impressive. In general, I am fascinated by Bosch's paintings. They are religious, and at the same time there is something demonic about them. Also, I thought it was so like Henry Miller, the paradox that he was, to choose the traditional religious Christian painting to represent the view of somebody who didn't consider himself a believer and was not religious in the traditional sense. Actually, Miller was much more of a Christian, a true believer, than he cared to admit. Well, he admits to it indirectly in his writings. I enjoyed Miller's descriptions of Big Sur, the physical, but more importantly, the intangible, the feelings it created in him. Paradise or no paradise, I have the very definite impression that the people of this vicinity are striving to live up to the grandeur and nobility which is such an integral part of the setting. They behave as if it were a privilege to live here, as if it were by an act of grace they found themselves here. The place itself is so overwhelmingly bigger, greater than anyone could hope to make it, that it engenders a humility and reverence not frequently met within Americans. There is nothing to improve on in the surroundings. The tendency is to set about improving oneself. It is as he has found his earthly paradise and sees it with an almost heavenly veneration. The current name is a mix of English and Spanish. Sur in Spanish means south. Originally, the Spanish colonists who had their provincial capital up north in Monterrey used to call the area El País Grande del Sur, the big country of the south, which later the Americans, after acquiring it from Mexico, shortened to Big Sur. Physically, the place has not changed that much, since it is still somewhat inaccessible, and there are many restrictions to keep it from overdevelopment and to maintain low number of residents. I think the significant changes were to its social image and status. Henry Miller decided to go to Big Sur because he read about it, but most of the Americans haven't heard about it, and at that time it was probably the most unknown region of the continental United States. He arrived there broke, which was his usual condition, and he led a semi-squatter life in a rundown shack with no electricity and irregular mail services, which was important since his survival, in large part, depended on the generosity of his fans, who would regularly mail him care packages. Here is Miller's initial wonderment upon seeing the Big Sur for the first time. Big Sur is the California that man dreamed of years ago. This is the Pacific that Balboa looked at from the peak of Darien. This is the face of the earth as the Creator intended to look. But, unfortunately, this Big Sur has slowly transformed, thanks to Miller's residency there and descriptions, attracting masses of his followers, and it is pretty much gone. In a more recent graphic depiction of it from one of the residents, exasperated by the number of visitors and illegal campers, the place has been labeled as a scenic highway with piles of shit up and down the road. Miller seems decided to settle in Big Sur as a sort of remedy To counter his earlier experiences, a year-long distressing road trip around the United States, he wrote about in The Air-Conditioned Nightmare. Nowhere have I encountered such a dull, monotonous fabric of life as here in America. In Big Sur, the book, Miller challenges modern society and its notions about the world and life. Through his rants and stories, he questions American materialism and consumerism, religion, ambition, and the whole idea of progress and development, and offers some homemade solutions for the unsatisfied individual. The ideal community, in a sense, would be the loose, fluid aggregation of individuals who elected to be alone and detached in order to be at one with themselves and all that lives and breathes. It would be God-filled community, even if none of its members believe in a God. It would be a paradise, even though the word had long disappeared from our vocabulary. It is seemingly another religious-like view from a non-believer. That's what I like about Henry Miller, his unintended or even unconscious redefining of our values, pointing at our hypocrisies through his pretty accurate observations. A lot of his observations and advice seem to be directed at the younger generation, perhaps something his children could read in the future when he is no longer here, since he had them when he was well into his 50s, and his previous hectic and unstable lifestyle didn't suggest he would live a long life. But he did into his late 80s, and perhaps the peace and tranquility he found in Big Sur greatly contributed to it. Miller warns about shortcomings and disappointments of success. A writer often has two great surprises in store for him. The first is the lack of proper response to his efforts. The second is the overwhelming nature of the response when it does come. One is just as bad as the other. He talks about writing and painting and art in general, the ultimate act of creation, not dependent on talent or success. Picasso said, "God and me, we experiment and we both make mistakes." And Miller used to say, "To paint is to love again." And in the book, he asks and answers what it is to be and live as an artist. No one is born an artist. One elects for it, and when you elect to be the first and last among men, you find nothing strange about sleeping with a donkey, putting your paws in the garbage pile, or swallowing reproaches and insults from all the near and dear ones who regard your way of life as a grave mistake. It seems for Henry Miller, to be an artist was to suffer physically, so you could be yourself and free in a more abstract definition of it, basically to be happy. The third part of the book focuses on the time period when Miller's acquaintance from Paris, Conrad Morgan, came to live with him in Big Sur. I call Morgan an acquaintance because I don't think either ever considered the other a friend. He was an incurable dandy, living the life of a beggar and living wholly in the past. Morgan also had pedophilic tendencies, as suggested in one of the stories he tells about following a mother with a young daughter and managing to get time alone with the daughter in a hotel room. He was a pedophile, and the story had a big effect on Miller, as it would on any normal person, especially with young children. As he uttered these words, I felt my hair stand on end. It was no longer Morgan I was facing, but Satan himself. I think by writing about Morgan, Miller wanted to tell his side of the story and counter any slander Morgan might, and probably did, laughed about him in France, referring to the treatment he received in Big Sur. Seems Miller's motivation to bring Morgan to the US was some kind of subconscious need to repay debt he might have felt he owed to some people back in Paris who supported and took care of him during his trying years, people like Ananis Nin, her husband, and a few others, Morgan also introduced Miller to Balzac's Seraphita, which had a deep impact on his life. What did I own Morgan? Nothing, and everything. Who was it to put Seraphita in my hands? Morgan is portrayed as a parasitical creature feeding off the goodwill of unsuspecting Good Samaritans, a social vampire, ungrateful and never satisfied. But of that instant I knew my wife was right, knew that I had made a grave mistake. In that moment I sensed the leech that Ananis had tried to get rid of. I saw the spoiled child, the man who had never done an honest stroke of work in his life, the destitute individual who was too proud to beg openly, but was not above milking a friend dry. I knew it all, felt it all, and already foresaw the end. As I said, Miller probably wanted to set the record straight, since he felt he wasn't treated fairly and didn't receive any credit for all the effort he made on behalf of Morgan. To sum it up, Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch is Henry Miller for everybody, mature and self-censored, empathetic and caring, nature's lover and a loving father, not needing to shag anymore, and seemingly at peace with the world and himself. This is a book without the profanity and explicit sexuality found in his more famous works. If there is any similarity to the Tropics, it is that it is autobiographical, but because it is older Henry Miller, there is a lot less action and a lot more recollection and his philosophy. But there is also the Miller's ever-present empathy and compassion for others, and passion for life and being alive. Big Sur, the place, was Henry Miller's world then, where he sought tranquility, simplicity, and disconnection from mid-20th century material and superficial America. To him, the place was pure earth in its unspoiled natural state, without any ancient ruins or signs of previous habitations, America of the past, which he found much more appealing. They had skies of pure azure and walls of fog moving in and out of the canyons with invisible feet, hills in winter of emerald green, and in summer mountains upon mountains of pure gold. They had even more, for there was ever the unfathomable silence of the forest, the blazing immensity of the Pacific, days drenched with sun and nights spangled with stars. Unlike Thoreau, who lasted only a couple of years at the Walden Pond, Miller managed a couple of decades, but in the end he also left for the greener pastures of Los Angeles. Eventually the success and fame caught up with him and destroyed what he appreciated the most about living in Big Sur. People who visited him there were usually disappointed at the condition he lived in. They imagined such a great and iconic writer would be living a bit more opulently. In reality, Henry Miller faced financial difficulties for the most of his life, not that he seemed to mind it. His material rewards didn't arrive until he was in his 60s, especially after his books were taken off the banned list in the US and allowed to be published widely. Miller never really seemed to care about material success and was satisfied with getting by and was happy just to write and create for the sake of creation. I think that's what made him a real artist. Is Miller's Big Sur still around? I don't know, I haven't been there, but even if it is, people who would fully appreciate it can't afford the entrance fee. Miller says he could live there on $7 a week, so yes, this Big Sur is gone. Hunter S. Thompson used to say, buy a ticket, take a ride. Well, in this case, the ticket is out of the reach for the most, but it is not important. What Miller was implying is that your Big Sur doesn't have to be the Big Sur. Everyone has to find their own, wherever or whatever it is. If we are always arriving and departing, it is also true that we are eternally anchored. One's destination is never a place, but rather a new way of looking at things. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I design the cover, which what I did here, I used this painting of Big Sur with the emblematic Bixby Creek Bridge, which is one of the most photographed bridges in the US, with its graceful architecture and magnificent setting. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform a paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.